I think I didn't do anything wrong. Just gave Elliot the space he desperately needed after another one of his silent tantrums. This morning, I watched the courier hand me divorce papers with my own name spelled out in bold. I'm still not sure how we got here. After all, I only left him at the bus station to make him realize how much he needed me. The kitchen felt smaller every evening, like the walls were closing in on our little family of three. I stood at the counter, watching Elliot help our 8-year-old daughter Renee with her math homework while I heated up leftover lasagna. The silence between us stretched like a rubber band ready to snap. "Daddy, I don't understand this problem," Renee said, her pencil hovering over the worksheet. Elliot leaned closer, his voice soft and patient. "Let's break it down step by step, sweetheart. What do we know about the first number?" I slammed the microwave door shut harder than necessary. Neither of them looked up. This was the problem. Elliot could give Renee all the attention in the world, but when it came to me, his wife, I might as well have been invisible. "Dinner's ready," I announced, setting the plates down with deliberate force. Elliot finally glanced up. "Thanks, Oriel. Just give us 2 more minutes to finish this." "It's always 2 more minutes with you," I muttered. Loud enough for him to hear, but quiet enough that I could deny it if he called me out. He didn't. He never did anymore. We ate in that familiar, suffocating silence. Elliot asked Renee about her day at school, praised her for helping a new student find the library, listened as she chattered about her art project. But when I mentioned the drama at work, how my supervisor had unfairly criticized my filing system, Elliot just nodded and kept eating. "Are you even listening to me?" I finally snapped. Elliot looked up, his brown eyes tired. "Of course I'm listening. Then what did I just say?" He set down his fork. "You said your supervisor criticized your filing system." And? What? I'm sorry that happened?" I threw my napkin down. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, Elliot. You're making me feel completely invisible. I tell you about my problems, and you act like you couldn't care less." Renee's fork clinked against her plate as she looked between us, her eyes wide and uncertain. "I do care," Elliot said quietly. "I just don't know what you want me to say. I want you to act like you give a damn about your wife's feelings." The words came out louder than I intended. "I want you to show some emotion, some passion, something other than this zombie act you've been putting on for months." Elliot's jaw tightened, but he didn't raise his voice. He never did. "Can we talk about this later, after Renee goes to bed?" "Of course. Push it off. Avoid the conversation. That's your solution to everything." I stood up, my chair scraping against the linoleum. "I'm going to call my mother." I retreated to the bedroom and dialed Mom's number, needing someone who would actually validate my feelings. "Honey, what's wrong?" Vivian Moss had always been able to read my mood from the first syllable. "It's Elliot again, Mom. He's emotionally abusive. He refuses to engage with me, refuses to talk about feelings, makes me feel like I'm crazy for wanting basic human connection from my husband." "Oh, sweetheart." Mom's voice was warm with sympathy. "I've been worried about this for months. A real man doesn't shut down when his wife needs support. Your father never treated me that way. I don't know what to do anymore. I feel like I'm drowning, and he's just watching from the shore. You deserve so much better, Ariel. You're a beautiful, intelligent woman, and any man would be lucky to have you. Don't let Elliot make you feel like you're asking for too much." After we hung up, I felt somewhat vindicated, but still hollow inside. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, stopping at Mason's name. Mason Keller worked at the coffee shop next to my office building, and unlike my husband, he actually seemed to notice me when I walked into a room. I typed quickly before I could second-guess myself. "Wish someone understood me." The response came within minutes. "Meet me tomorrow? I get off at 3. I smiled for the first time all day, then quickly deleted the conversation thread. When I returned to the kitchen, Elliot was loading the dishwasher, while Renee worked on her homework at the table. He glanced at me, but didn't ask about my phone call. Typical. As he quietly left the room to help Renee get ready for bed, I felt a strange mixture of guilt and excitement about tomorrow's meeting with Mason. Elliot had driven me to this point, I told myself. If he couldn't be bothered to fight for his marriage, maybe it was time I found someone who would. The next afternoon, I found myself sitting across from Mason Keller in the corner booth of Brew and Bean, the little cafe that had become my refuge from the suffocating atmosphere at home. Mason's green eyes sparkled with the kind of attention I'd been starving for, and his easy smile made me feel alive in a way I'd almost forgotten was possible. "You look beautiful today, Ariel," he said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. That blue brings out your eyes. When was the last time Elliot had complimented my appearance? I couldn't remember. Thank you, I said, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. It's nice to be seen. Your husband doesn't see you? Mason's thumb traced across my knuckles, sending shivers up my arm. I sighed, letting my shoulders slump with the weight of my marital burden. Elliot's practically a ghost. He comes home, helps Renee with homework, watches TV, goes to bed. He never talks to me, never asks how I'm feeling, never shows any passion about anything. It's like living with a robot. That's terrible, Mason said, his voice full of genuine concern. A woman like you should be cherished, not ignored. I keep trying to get through to him, but he just shuts down. Yesterday I tried to tell him how his behavior was affecting me, and he just sat there like a statue. No emotion, no response, nothing. Mason shook his head. I can't imagine treating someone I loved that way. Our meetings became a regular occurrence. Every few days, I'd find an excuse to extend my lunch break or claim I needed to work late, just to spend an hour in Mason's company. He listened to my frustrations about Elliot's emotional unavailability, sympathized with my loneliness, made me feel like a desirable woman instead of an invisible housewife. You deserve so much better, he'd tell me, and I'd find myself believing it more each time. At work, my colleagues began to notice my improved mood. Someone's glowing lately, said Janet from accounting during our coffee break. New skincare routine, I laughed, feeling secretive and powerful. Just finally taking some time for myself. Good for you. You've seemed so stressed lately. Is everything okay at home? I hesitated, then decided to share just a little. Elliot's been difficult. He's so forgetful and dull lately. I sometimes wonder if he even remembers he has a wife. Janet made sympathetic noises, and I felt validated in my choices. If my own colleagues could see that Elliot wasn't meeting my needs, then surely I wasn't being unreasonable. But as the weeks passed, the secrecy became more challenging. I found myself constantly checking my phone for messages from Mason, deleting our conversations, making excuses for my whereabouts. The thrill of it was intoxicating, but it was also exhausting. One evening, I came home later than usual after an extended cafe session with Mason. Elliot was in the living room, and I noticed my phone sitting on the coffee table. I must have forgotten it in my rush to meet Mason. How was work? Elliot asked, his voice neutral. Fine, busy day. I tried to sound casual as I picked up my phone, but my heart was racing. Had he looked through it? The screen was dark, giving nothing away. Elliot studied my face for a long moment. Oriel, are you happy? The question caught me off guard. What kind of question is that? A simple one. Are you happy? In our marriage? In your life? I felt a flicker of panic. Was this his way of saying he knew something? Why would you ask that? You seem distant lately, different. Maybe because my husband never pays attention to me, I deflected, turning the accusation back on him where it belonged. If you're finally noticing something's wrong, maybe you should look at your own behavior. Elliot's shoulders sagged slightly. I'm trying, Ariel. I know I'm not perfect, but I'm trying. Are you? I challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've completely checked out of this marriage. He didn't respond, just looked down at his hands. The familiar frustration bubbled up inside me. Even when he was trying to have a serious conversation, he couldn't sustain it. You're being paranoid, I said finally, then sat down and discreetly deleted my message thread with Mason under the table. Elliot didn't notice, lost in his own thoughts as usual. But something in his expression made me uneasy. There was a quiet determination there that I hadn't seen before, like he was making mental notes of something important. I pushed the feeling aside and focused instead on Mason's last message, which had made me smile during dinner. Can't wait to see you again. At least someone appreciated me. Sunday dinner at my mother's house had always been a sanctuary for me. But lately, it felt more like a battlefield where Elliot was consistently outgunned. Mom had invited Elliot's mother Harriet and his sister Leah, ostensibly to maintain family harmony. But I could see the tension crackling between the two sides of our family. Elliot, you're looking thin, Mom said as she passed the roast, her voice carrying just enough concern to sound caring and just enough criticism to land a blow. Is Oriel not feeding you properly? Elliot managed a weak smile. I'm fine, Vivian, just been busy with work. Always work with you, Mom continued, warming to her theme. A man should make time for his family, not bury himself in computers all day. Harriet shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Elliot works very hard to provide for his family. IT consulting isn't exactly a 9-to-5 job. Oh, I'm sure he works hard, Mom said with a dismissive wave. But there's more to being a husband than just bringing home a paycheck. I saw my opening and took it. That's what I keep trying to tell him, Mom. He's never emotionally present. Even when he's physically here, it's like he's somewhere else entirely. Elliot's fork paused halfway to his mouth, but he didn't defend himself. He never did, which only proved my point. Just last week, I continued, emboldened by Mom's supportive nods, he left Renee waiting at school for an hour because he forgot about pickup duty. I had to leave work early to get her. Laya frowned. That doesn't sound like Elliot. He's usually very responsible with Renee. Well, he's been very scattered lately, I said, enjoying the way Elliot's face flushed. Sometimes I wonder if there's something wrong with him mentally. The forgetfulness, the emotional distance. Oreo, Harriet said sharply. That's quite an accusation. I'm not accusing, I'm concerned, I replied, letting hurt creep into my voice. I'm worried about my husband, but he won't talk to me about anything. He just shuts down whenever I try to address our problems. Elliot finally spoke, his voice quiet but strained. I never forgot to pick up Renee. See? I turned to the table with exasperated hands. He can't even acknowledge when he makes mistakes. How am I supposed to work with that? Leah looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. Maybe this isn't the best place to… No, it's fine, I interrupted. Maybe Elliot needs to hear how his behavior affects other people. Maybe if it comes from family, he'll finally listen. Mom leaned forward, her maternal instincts fully activated. Elliot, honey, I've watched you become more and more withdrawn over the years. A woman needs emotional intimacy from her husband. Oriel is a vibrant, caring person, and she's withering away because you won't engage with her. Elliot's hands clenched in his lap, but he remained silent. Renee, who had been quietly coloring at the kids' table, looked up with worried eyes. Is Daddy sick? She asked innocently. The question hung in the air like a bomb. I felt a moment of guilt, but pushed it aside. If Elliot would just participate in these conversations, instead of sitting there like a lump, we wouldn't have to talk around him. Daddy's just tired, sweetheart, Harriet said quickly, shooting me a look that could have melted steel. My phone buzzed with a text, and I glanced down to see Mason's name on the screen. Miss you. I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips. At least someone appreciated me enough to reach out on a Sunday evening. Elliot's eyes flicked to my phone, then to my face, and I saw something shift in his expression. For just a moment, he looked less defeated and more calculating. I think we should go, he said suddenly, standing up. Renee, get your jacket. But we haven't had dessert yet, Renee protested. We'll have ice cream at home, Elliot said, his voice firm in a way I rarely heard anymore. Leah stood as well. I should get going too. Thank you for dinner, Vivian. As they gathered their things, I felt a strange mixture of victory and unease. I'd successfully demonstrated Elliot's inadequacies to both sides of the family, but something about the way he'd looked at my phone bothered me. After they left, Mom and I settled in the living room with wine and dessert. You're a saint for putting up with that man, Mom said, shaking her head. He's completely checked out. No wonder you're struggling. I just don't know what to do anymore, I confided. I feel like I'm married to a stranger. You deserve better, sweetheart. You deserve a man who fights for you, who shows passion, who makes you feel alive. I thought about Mason's text, still glowing on my phone screen, and felt a warm flutter in my chest. Maybe Mom was right. Maybe I did deserve better. The mandatory counseling session downtown had been Elliot's idea, another one of his half-hearted attempts to fix our marriage without actually addressing the real problems. Dr. Martinez had spent an hour trying to get Elliot to open up about his feelings while I explained, as patiently as possible, how his emotional unavailability was destroying our relationship. I feel like I'm talking to a wall, I'd told the counselor while Elliot sat silent beside me. He never responds when I try to discuss our issues. Elliot had finally spoken up. I do respond. I just don't always know what you want me to say. I want you to care enough to figure it out, I'd shot back. Now, as we walked toward the bus station for the ride home, Elliot seemed more agitated than usual. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, and he kept glancing at me like he wanted to say something. That was productive, he said finally, his voice heavy with sarcasm. It would be more productive if you actually participated, I replied. Dr. Martinez can't help us if you won't engage. Elliot stopped walking. I want to talk, Ariel. Really talk. Can we do that on the bus ride home? Something in his tone made me uncomfortable. There was an intensity there that felt dangerous, like he might actually expect me to take responsibility for some of our problems. I wasn't ready for that kind of confrontation. I can't, I said quickly. I have errands to run downtown. You should take the next bus home. What errands? Elliot asked, his brow furrowing. You didn't mention anything this morning. I don't have to clear my schedule with you, I snapped, feeling defensive. I need to pick up some things for Renee, maybe grab groceries. You can manage a bus ride by yourself, can't you? Elliot stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Disappointment giving way to something harder, more resolute. Fine, he said quietly. I'll see you at home. I watched him walk toward the bus station, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and felt a surge of satisfaction. Maybe some time alone would help him realize how much he needed me, how much he'd been taking me for granted. Instead of running errands, I drove to a nearby shopping center and treated myself to a coffee and some retail therapy. I posted a vague update on social media. Sometimes you have to be strong enough to walk away. He's self-care, he's know your worth. The responses were immediate and supportive. You go, girl, from my cousin Sarah. Stay strong, beautiful, from my coworker Janet. Even Mom commented, so proud of my strong daughter. I felt vindicated in my decision. Elliot needed to learn that I wasn't going to coddle him anymore, wasn't going to enable his emotional laziness. If he wanted to save our marriage, he needed to step up and fight for it. When I finally arrived home 3 hours later, Elliot's car wasn't in the driveway. Good, I thought. Maybe he'd gone for a drive to think about what I'd said in counseling, about how his behavior was pushing me away. But when I walked into the house, something felt different. Elliot's keys were sitting on the kitchen table, and the spare bedroom door was closed. I could hear movement behind it, drawers opening and closing, the sound of hangers scraping against the closet rod. Elliot, I called out. What are you doing? The sounds stopped, but he didn't answer. After a few minutes, the door opened and Elliot emerged with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Where are you going? I asked, genuinely surprised. To my mother's, he said without looking at me. I need some space to think. About what? Elliot finally met my eyes, and what I saw there made my stomach clench. It wasn't the defeated resignation I'd grown used to. It was something cold and determined. About us. About what I want. About what I'm willing to accept. Elliot, you're being dramatic. We had one fight, and now you're running away? I'm not running away, he said quietly. I'm making a choice. He walked past me toward the door, and I felt a flicker of panic. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to realize he needed me, not pull away even further. What about Renee? I called after him. She'll wonder where you are. Elliot paused at the door. Tell her I love her, and I'll see her soon. Tell her this isn't about her. And then he was gone, leaving me standing in the kitchen with his keys and a growing sense that I'd miscalculated something important. I tried calling him twice, but both calls went straight to voicemail. Fine, I thought. Let him sulk at his mother's house. He'd be back in a day or two, ready to apologize and work on our marriage properly. But as I sat alone in our too-quiet house, scrolling through the supportive comments on my social media post, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Elliot's expression when he'd looked at me. It hadn't been the face of a man planning to come crawling back. It had been the face of a man who'd finally made up his mind about something. Oedo. The official summons arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who asked me to sign for the thick manila envelope, with my name typed across the front in official-looking font. Inside were divorce papers. Actual, legal divorce papers, along with a request for emergency custody arrangements and a restraining order regarding our joint assets. I stared at the documents in shock. Elliot had been staying at his mother's house for 2 weeks, but I'd assumed he was just being dramatic, that he'd eventually come home ready to work on our marriage like a mature adult. This was not the behavior I'd expected from my passive, conflict-avoidant husband. The papers requested that I appear at a family mediation session the following Friday, with legal representation recommended. Legal representation for what should have been a simple conversation about Elliot's hurt feelings. I called Mom immediately. He's lost his mind, I told her, pacing around the kitchen while Renee ate her cereal. He's trying to ruin my life out of spite. What grounds could he possibly have? Mom asked, her voice indignant. You've been nothing but patient with that man. I have no idea. Maybe he's having some kind of breakdown. But even as I said it, I felt a growing unease. Elliot didn't have breakdowns. He was annoyingly stable and methodical about everything. If he'd filed for divorce, he had a reason. Friday arrived faster than I'd expected. I sat across from Elliot in the sterile mediation office, flanked by lawyers I could barely afford, trying to process the transformation in my husband. Gone was the defeated, withdrawn man I'd been living with. In his place sat someone calm, prepared, and quietly confident. "Mr. Finch," the mediator began, "you've filed for divorce on grounds of adultery and emotional abuse. Do you have evidence to support these claims?" Elliot's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chen, slid a thick folder across the table. "We have extensive documentation, Your Honor." I felt my blood turn to ice as Patricia began laying out the contents of the folder like playing cards in a deadly game. Text message screenshots between Mrs. Finch and Mason Keller, dating back 3 months, she said, placing the first stack of papers on the table. Cafe receipts showing regular meetings during work hours. Bank statements showing Mrs. Finch's frequent purchases at Brew and Bean, often during times when she claimed to be working late. My mouth went dry. How had Elliot gotten access to my bank statements? Additionally, Patricia continued, we have dash cam footage from Mr. Finch's vehicle showing Mrs. Finch leaving him stranded at the downtown bus station on March 15th, despite her social media posts claiming he stormed off and left her stranded. She placed a series of still images on the table, clear shots of me walking away from Elliot at the bus station, getting into my car alone while he stood waiting for the bus. We also have Mrs. Finch's social media posts from that same evening, Patricia said, where she claimed to be the victim of abandonment, along with supporting comments from family members who were given false information about the incident. I looked at Elliot, searching for some sign of the man I'd married, the man who avoided confrontation and let me take the lead in difficult situations. But his expression was unreadable, professional almost. "Mr. Finch," the mediator continued, "you're also requesting primary custody of the minor child. On what grounds?" "Emotional stability and consistent caregiving," Patricia replied. "Mr. Finch has been the primary caretaker responsible for school pickup, homework assistance, and daily care routines. We have documentation from the school showing perfect attendance at parent-teacher conferences, timely pickup records, and volunteer participation in school activities." She placed another stack of papers on the table. "Mrs. Finch, by contrast, has been increasingly absent from parenting duties, often claiming work obligations that we can prove were actually meetings with her affair partner." "This is ridiculous," I finally found my voice. "Elliot's trying to paint me as a bad mother because I had coffee with a friend a few times." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Coffee with a friend? Mrs. Finch, we have text messages where you explicitly discuss your sexual relationship with Mr. Keller, including plans to meet at his apartment." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd deleted those messages. I was sure I'd deleted them. "How did you get my private messages?" I demanded, looking at Elliot with a mixture of betrayal and panic. Elliot spoke for the first time since we'd sat down, his voice calm and steady. "You left your phone unlocked several times. I took screenshots to document what was happening to our marriage." That's illegal." "Actually," Patricia interjected, "in Ohio, spouses have legal access to shared devices and accounts. Everything we've presented was obtained legally." The mediator reviewed the documents while I sat in stunned silence. This couldn't be happening. Elliot was supposed to be the weak one, the one who couldn't handle confrontation or make difficult decisions. How had he managed to build such a comprehensive case against me? "Finch," the mediator said finally, "do you have any response to these allegations?" I looked at my lawyer, a young public defender who looked as overwhelmed as I felt. My marriage was already over emotionally. Elliot had completely checked out. He was emotionally abusive, never communicated, made me feel invisible in my own home. "Do you have documentation of this emotional abuse?" the mediator asked. No. It's not the kind of thing you document. It's about feelings, about being ignored and neglected." Elliot's lawyer leaned forward. "Your Honor, we'd like to present character witness statements from family members, co-workers, and school personnel who can testify to Mr. Finch's character and his relationship with his daughter." As she began reading statements from Elliot's sister, his mother, even Renee's teacher, I felt the ground shifting beneath me. This wasn't the narrative I'd been crafting for months. In their words, Elliot emerged as a devoted father, a reliable colleague, a quiet but caring man who'd been struggling with his wife's increasingly erratic behavior. In conclusion, Patricia said, Mr. Finch is requesting primary custody of the minor child, with supervised visitation for Mrs. Finch until she can demonstrate emotional stability. He's also requesting protection of his assets and retirement accounts, which Mrs. Finch has been attempting to access without his knowledge. I stared at Elliot across the table, finally understanding that the quiet, methodical man I'd underestimated had been quietly, methodically building a case against me for months. While I'd been focused on justifying my affair and managing my reputation, he'd been documenting everything. We'll reconvene next week for final arrangements, the mediator announced. Mrs. Finch, I strongly recommend you obtain proper legal counsel. Ohatigebi. As we filed out of the room, Elliot paused beside my chair. For a moment, I thought he might say something conciliatory, might offer some path back from this disaster. Instead, he simply said, I hope you find what you're looking for, Oreo, but it won't be at my expense anymore. The family courtroom felt like a stage where I was performing a role I'd never auditioned for, the defendant in the dissolution of my own life. 3 weeks had passed since the mediation session. 3 weeks during which my hastily hired lawyer had tried desperately to construct some defense against Elliot's methodical dismantling of our marriage. Judge Patricia Hendricks reviewed the case files with the detached efficiency of someone who'd seen this story too many times before. Elliot sat at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, looking more composed than I'd ever seen him. Gone completely was the uncertain, withdrawn man I'd been married to. In his place sat someone who'd found his voice and wasn't afraid to use it. Mrs. Finch, Judge Hendricks began, you've had 3 weeks to respond to your husband's petition. Do you contest the evidence presented regarding your extramarital affair? My lawyer, a harried-looking woman named Rebecca Torres, who I'd found through a desperate Google search, leaned forward. Your Honor, my client acknowledges that the marriage had deteriorated, but she maintains that her husband's emotional neglect contributed to— That's not what I asked, the judge interrupted. Do you contest the evidence of the affair, yes or no? I felt heat rise in my cheeks as every eye in the courtroom turned to me. No, Your Honor, but do you contest the evidence that you deliberately abandoned your husband at a public transit station and then misrepresented the incident on social media? Your Honor, that was a misunderstanding. Yes or no, Mrs. Finch? The words stuck in my throat. No, Your Honor. Judge Hendricks made a note and turned to Elliot's lawyer. Miss Chen, please present your custody recommendation. Patricia Chen stood with the same crisp confidence she'd displayed throughout this nightmare. Your Honor, Mr. Finch requests primary physical custody of the minor child, Renee Finch, with supervised visitation for Mrs. Finch pending completion of family counseling and a psychological evaluation. Supervised visitation? I couldn't help myself. She's my daughter. Finch, Judge Hendricks said sharply, you'll have your turn to speak. Miss Chen continued, as if I hadn't interrupted. The child has been staying with Mr. Finch at his mother's residence for the past month, and has shown marked improvement in her emotional state, according to her school counselor's report. She handed another document to the judge. Renee's teacher notes that her anxiety levels have decreased significantly, her academic performance has improved, and she's been more social with her peers. The child has expressed a preference to remain in her current living situation. My heart clenched. Renee wanted to stay with Elliot? When had that happened? Additionally, Miss Chen said, we have concerns about Mrs. Finch's judgment regarding the child's welfare. Phone records show that Mrs. Finch has been in contact with her affair partner as recently as last week, despite claiming the relationship was over. I felt my face burn. I had called Mason once just to explain what was happening, to see if he might be willing to testify about Elliot's emotional unavailability. But Mason had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with my drama and had basically hung up on me. Your Honor, my lawyer tried again. Mrs. Finch is a loving mother who made some poor choices in a troubled marriage. She's willing to attend counseling and do whatever it takes to maintain a relationship with her daughter. Judge Hendricks reviewed the documents for what felt like an eternity. When she finally looked up, her expression was stern. Mrs. Finch, I've reviewed the evidence in this case, including text messages, financial records, witness statements, and photographic documentation. I've also reviewed the child welfare assessment and spoken with Renee's school counselor. She leaned forward slightly. Your behavior over the past several months shows a pattern of deception, manipulation, and poor judgment that directly impacted your child's emotional well-being. Your attempts to manipulate family members and social media followers by misrepresenting events is particularly concerning. I wanted to argue, to explain that Elliot had driven me to those choices, but the words wouldn't come. Therefore, Judge Hendricks continued, I'm granting Mr. Finch primary physical and legal custody of the minor child. Mrs. Finch will have supervised visitation every other weekend, pending completion of individual counseling and a psychological evaluation. The gavel came down like a gunshot. Regarding asset division, the judge continued, given Mrs. Finch's deliberate deception and the financial resources she diverted to support her extramarital relationship, I'm awarding Mr. Finch the family home and primary retirement accounts. Mrs. Finch will receive her personal belongings and her individual savings account. Another bang of the gavel, and it was over. I sat in stunned silence as people began filing out of the courtroom. Elliot's mother, Harriet, was crying. Not tears of sadness, but what looked like tears of relief. She hugged Elliot tightly while his sister Leah rubbed his back in support. My own mother had stormed out during the judge's ruling, muttering something about corrupt courts and men protecting each other, but I barely heard her. All I could focus on was the way Elliot looked as he accepted congratulations from his family. Not victorious or vindictive, just quietly relieved. As he gathered his papers, Elliot glanced over at me one last time. There was no anger in his expression, no triumph, just a kind of sad finality, like he was looking at a stranger he'd once known well. "Daddy!" Renee's voice echoed through the hallway as she ran to Elliot from where she'd been waiting with Harriet. She threw her arms around his waist, and he lifted her up in a tight hug. "Are we going home now?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart," Elliot said softly. "We're going home." I watched them walk away together, my husband and my daughter, and realized that somewhere in my pursuit of validation and excitement, I'd lost sight of what I actually had. Elliot hadn't been emotionally unavailable. He'd been quietly, steadily present in ways I'd stopped noticing. He hadn't been neglecting our family. He'd been holding it together while I'd been busy tearing it apart. As I sat alone in the empty courtroom, I understood that Elliot had been thinking during all those quiet moments I'd interpreted as withdrawal. He'd been thinking, planning, and ultimately deciding that he and Renee deserved better than the chaos I'd brought into their lives. I'd left him at that bus station to teach him a lesson about needing me. Instead, I'd taught him something entirely different, that he was strong enough to build a life without me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent months complaining that Elliot never fought for our marriage, never showed passion or took decisive action.